Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Grant Management Training for Texas Parks and Wildlife's Community Outdoor Outreach Program. If you are viewing this presentation, that means you were recently awarded a co-op grant. Congratulations! Co-op is a very competitive grant program, and we receive far more applications than we can support each year. So we really look forward to partnering with you over the next 18 months. This video will review the requirements and documentation needed to submit a reimbursement for your co-op grant. Not all of you may have received government grants before, and so you may not be aware of some of the stipulations that come with those grant dollars. This training will provide an overview of these expectations. Remember, if you have any questions along the way, don't hesitate to contact grant staff for assistance. The first part of this video may cover the same information provided in the programmatic training video. However, we will get to the specific information for reimbursements shortly. Unlike foundations and other private funding sources, government grants originate from community tax dollars. Specifically for co-op, program funds are derived from a portion of the sporting goods sales tax. This includes tax received on camping, hunting, fishing gear, kayaks, etc. Therefore, Texas Parks and Wildlife must follow government regulations when administering grant funds to the community. First up, we have the Texas Grant Management Standards, which is a set of financial management procedures and definitions that state agencies must follow when awarding grant dollars. This is operated by the Texas Comptroller. If you're familiar with federal grants, the Texas Grant Management Standards is Texas's version of 2 CFR 200. Co-op was created in 1996 by the Texas legislature and was identified in Chapter 24 of the Parks and Wildlife Code. This is our guiding statute which dictates the program's purpose and intent. Luckily, you don't need to know the specifics of all of these different grant documents. Locally, we have created a co-op program guidance document for grant sponsors, which outlines the expectations and requirements specific to applying for and managing a co-op grant. First up, we're going to talk about your approved budget. The approved budget is part of your grant agreement and is the guiding document for receiving reimbursements of eligible expenses. To access your approved budget, find your current project application and click on the Project Budget Details link located here. Depending on how many items are listed in the budget, it may take a little while to load, so please be patient. This is what your approved budget should look like. It's important to note that not all items may have been approved. Only the items with amounts listed in the approved TPWD cost column will be allowable for reimbursement. Some items may have been disallowed from your proposed budget, so review this section very carefully. In addition, staff may have revised certain line items to make things easier down the road for our reimbursement auditing staff. So if you've listed individual items in great detail, such as climbing ropes, harnesses, carabiners, helmets, etc., we may have condensed those items into a simplified rock climbing supplies line item. This will benefit you greatly, as less budget revisions may be needed later on if your items are clumped together like this. If you need a printer-friendly version of the budget, you can click on the Print Version Budget button located at the top right-hand side of your screen. If you want to purchase an item that is not already listed in the approved TPWD cost column of the budget, you can request a budget revision to add the item to your approved budget. It's best practice to complete this budget revision process before the item is purchased, as we may not allow the revision. Budget revisions must be carefully completed before you seek reimbursement for that item. Budget revisions are the most common amendment and does not require a signature from both parties. To request a budget revision, find your current grant project in Argo. Hover over the status change link in the top left-hand corner, then choose Amendment Revision Request and Process. Please know that once you click the status, you will not be able to submit a reimbursement request. Reimbursement documents are calculated using the approved budget, and when you begin an amendment or it's in process, you're requesting to change that budget. Therefore, the amendment must be fully completed before you can submit your next reimbursement request. Once you've status changed it, a new option will appear on your main forms menu. You must click the Amendment Revision Request link that appears at the bottom of the screen. Now the revision request form will appear. Choose which type of amendment you're requesting, in this case, adding a budget item. In the narrative, include the item to add, the cost of the new item, and which existing line item or items will be decreased to offset the cost. Once complete, click Save, then hover over the status change link in the top left-hand corner and choose Submit. Once staff complete their task internally, you'll receive email notification if it's approved or if we need next steps. Grant staff will add the new line item directly to your approved budget, so it will appear the next time you view the budget. There are a few tips to remember when requesting a budget revision. Your total grant reward will not increase. Be sure to let us know where the funds for the items will come from. If you're just reallocating funds from one existing line item to another, you do not need an amendment or any sort of approval. If it's a significant change, like you're moving most of your budget into one existing line item, you may want to reach out to co-op staff before doing so, because sometimes that can have some red flags with our auditing staff. It's highly recommended to request budget revisions before the item is purchased. There's no guarantee that item will be approved, so it's best practice to add it to the budget first to ensure your organization won't have to eat the cost if it's not approved. Remember, the item must be added before a reimbursement request is requested. As a reminder, here's a list of common disallowed items, which is also found in the co-op program guidance document. A few of the common items include marketing materials, construction expenses, since we have different grant programs for construction, prizes and certificates, sales tax, which is by far the most common disallowed item, and then storage buildings. For a full list of these items, don't forget to check out the program guidance document if you have any questions. Next on to items specific to reimbursements, and we do have a checklist to make sure that you have all the documents needed. When submitting a reimbursement request, you must provide two primary types of backup documentation to prove the item was purchased. Depending on the expenditure, you'll need a receipt, invoice, or work record, otherwise known as a timesheet. Proof of payment is also required for each item purchased. We'll start with receipts. A photocopy of the receipt should be provided with your backup documentation. Each receipt must contain a minimum of the date purchased, vendor name, an itemized list of purchases, and the amount paid. All receipts must be legible for review, so if it's been torn, part of it's missing, or the ink has faded, you may not receive reimbursement for that expense. Because this is a government grant program, sales tax is not eligible for reimbursement. Sales tax is by far the most common reason for disallowances, so make sure to exclude it from your request. Finally, all items must be itemized on the receipt so our auditing staff can confirm the purchase of each requested item. The state's cost principles are followed for all expenditures. As a summary, the costs must be necessary and reasonable, be allowable as described in the grant agreement, and must be allocable to a particular cost objective. For a full description of cost principles, refer to the Texas Grant Management Standards description of cost principles. Now we'll go over contractor reimbursements. Reimbursements for independent contractor costs require an invoice from that contractor. Common contractors for co-op grants include guides that assist with events and so on. Invoices must include the amount paid to the contractor, a description of the service provided, the date of services rendered, and the taxpayer identification number. For individuals, the taxpayer identification number would be their Social Security number. Like all other transactions, proof of payment is required. If invoices are new to your organization and you're looking for an example, you can contact our grant staff to obtain a standard template that you can use. Now let's talk about reimbursement for personnel. Reimbursements for personnel within your organization require work records, otherwise known as timesheets. Timesheets must include the employee's name, hours worked, hourly pay rate, total amount paid to the employee, their fringe benefits, and should be signed by the authorized supervisor. Like all other transactions, proof of payment is required. For those organizations who have never received a government grant in the past, timesheets are often a new requirement for their employees, but they will be required in order to get repaid. You're not required to use our template as long as all the information is provided, but if you need a template, we're happy to provide you with one. Next up, we'll talk about proof of payment. The second part of required documentation is proof of payment for each expenditure. Proof of payment may vary depending on the form of payment. The following proof of payment is required for each transaction. If you paid with a check, you'll need a digital check copy from the bank showing the amount paid, or a copy of the non-canceled check with the bank statement showing the check cleared the account. If you paid with a P card or debit or credit card, a copy of the statement showing charges is required. If you paid with a credit card, you'll need a copy of the canceled check paid to the credit card company showing you paid the charges at the end of the month. Petty cash and gift cards are allowed, but are really not recommended as they can be more complicated to show proof and just tend to be more complicated in the long run. Itemization for cash being withdrawn from petty cash is required, as well as the digital check copy showing the funds have been replenished. It's important to know that donated gift cards are not eligible for reimbursement to avoid potential double dipping of funds. If you need additional guidance on any of the required proof of payment methods, don't hesitate to contact grant staff. Paying with personal funds. Employees and volunteers may purchase items with their personal funds and be reimbursed for those expenses. To ensure everything is routed through the awarded entity, the grant sponsor must pay those individuals first, then seek reimbursement from TPWD for those expenses. Documents required for this type of reimbursement include a copy of the original receipt or invoice from the purchase, as well as proof of payment from the organization to the individual for the expenditures. Lodging is approved if it's listed on your approved budget. So if lodging from a hotel or a camp facility is listed on the approved budget, you may seek reimbursement for those expenses. Receipts must include the date of stay, nightly rate, number of rooms used for each night, the hotel location and contact information, and must show a zero balance on the receipt or some type of proof of payment. Unlike most other expenditures, hotel state and local tax is allowable for hotels since these are typically not waived with tax-exempt forms. If listed on the approved budget, your organization may seek reimbursement for travel expenses as well. Rental vehicles, bus transportation, gas, and mileage reimbursement are all allowed if they are listed on the approved budget. Keep in mind that you may not claim both gas and mileage for the same travel, as this would be considered double dipping for the same expense. TPWD uses the current federal mileage rate when reimbursing for mileage. You can find the current federal mileage rate on the IRS website. To receive reimbursement for mileage, a mileage log is required, which includes the name of the traveler, date of activity, number of miles driven per day, the relevant grant-related activities, and the starting and ending points. Now let's talk about actually submitting a reimbursement in our system. To submit a reimbursement, you must log into the online grant management system called Recreation Grants Online, otherwise known as ARGO, and find your current co-op grant project. Hover over the Related Documents and Messages link near the top of the screen and select Initiate a Payment Reimbursement Request. Once you open the new reimbursement request link that is unlocked, you can begin entering information for this request. At the top, much of this information will auto-populate for your specific organization. You must select the current fiscal contact from the drop-down menu in case there are any questions on the request and our auditing staff need to contact you. Next, you see a built-in spreadsheet to complete. Here's where the bulk of information is provided. You must complete a line item for each item purchased. So if you purchase 10 sleeping bags in the same transaction, you include one item for those 10 sleeping bags and include the activity date that item will be used for, vendor name, date of purchase, invoice number, type of payment, and the payment reference number if provided. Then you'll include the specific category for that item that was listed on the approved budget, such as personnel, fees, supplies, etc. Then you'll include the requested dollar amount for that expense. If part of that expense is covered by your organization as a sponsor contribution, you can include it in the match column. Complete the process for all of your expenses you're requesting reimbursement for. Since this portion can take a while to complete if you have multiple items or a really big reimbursement request, make sure to click Save in the upper right-hand corner often so the page will not time out and your information is not lost. It happens all the time. We really hate when it happens because it's a complete pain for you to redo. Next, you'll need to submit all of the backup documentation required. As mentioned before, the backup documentation includes invoices, receipts, work records, as well as the proof of payment for each expenditure. Unfortunately, you are not able to upload each document individually. Our system is limited in this capacity and is a little bit challenging here. Therefore, if you upload multiple documents, only the last document uploaded will appear for our auditing staff to review, and your reimbursement will be considered incomplete. Instead, you should merge all documents into one PDF and upload that one PDF into this section. Once all sections of the form are complete, click Save one last time, then hover over the Status Change link in the top left-hand corner and select Payment Reimbursement Submitted. Once completed, our auditing team will receive notification to review your request. If additional clarification or backup documents are needed, an email will be sent requesting the additional information through the ARGO system. To ensure all requests make it to the review queue and to protect private information included in the request, reimbursements will not be accepted outside of this ARGO system. Once the grant agreement is in place, projects are eligible to request a one-time seed money advance for up to 10% of the total grant award amount. We know a lot of organizations that receive co-op grants are pretty small, and even larger organizations could really use some of that upfront money to purchase expenses. This seed money request will provide the upfront advance of funds to purchase approved items listed on the budget. To request seed money, you will initiate a reimbursement request just like you did on the previous slide. Once you get to the request page, type in seed money request, today's date, and choose the seed money option in the drop-down menu for payment type. Include the amount of funds you're requesting, which should not exceed 10% of the overall grant award amount. Then complete the seed money request form, which is found in the Co-op Resources link at the top right-hand corner, and upload the completed form where you would normally upload the backup documentation. Once submitted, staff will process your request and you should receive the advance soon. Keep in mind that you can only request a seed money advance one time prior to submitting other reimbursements, and you must provide the backup documentation for seed money purchases before future reimbursement requests are submitted in the system. Next up, we'll talk about your final reimbursement. The final reimbursement is due no later than 45 days after the period of performance ends. If you have completed activities and purchases before then, by all means, you can submit the final reimbursement and final program report sooner to close the grant early. All expenses and grant-related activities must be completed during the period of performance. Anything falling outside of the grant period will be disallowed. If you have a large amount of funds remaining near the end of the grant period with no future activities planned, you may not purchase supplies to spend down remaining funds. While we want you to spend down all the funds available, all purchases must be linked to a grant-related activity. Supplies purchased solely for future post-grant period activities can't be linked to a grant-related activity and will be disallowed. Finally, please be aware of our records retention policy stated in the co-op program guidance document. You must retain all records relating to the performance of the grant, including supporting fiscal documents, in case the project is selected for an audit. All records must be retained by your organization for 4 years after the grant expiration date or until all audit matters are resolved, whichever is later. A few tips to consider when submitting a reimbursement request. Make sure to include all required documentation before submitting the request. If documents are not complete, you will experience delays in receiving payment because we'll have to go back and forth between our staff and your staff to receive the missing documents. While there is no absolute deadline for submitting reimbursement requests other than the final reimbursement, it's highly recommended to submit reimbursement requests on a quarterly basis if items were purchased during that quarter. This is to ensure grant spending is on track throughout the grant's lifecycle. Smaller reimbursement requests are also easier on our grant staff to review and can be processed quicker rather than a big request with 100+ items. When in doubt about purchasing a specific item, don't hesitate to contact grant staff. It's much better to know an item will be approved before the purchase is made rather than finding out it will be disallowed for reimbursements after the purchase. We really want to make sure that your organization won't have to eat costs that you thought would be allowed but actually won't be allowed. It's highly encouraged to spend all grant funds available. If significant money is remaining towards the grant, a scoring deduction may be in place on future grant proposals. Finally, sponsor contribution or sponsor match is not required for co-op grants. If you listed sponsor costs in the proposed budget, you are not required to report those in-kind or purchased expenses to TPWD. Since this is not required and scoring is no longer received for this section during the proposal review process, you do not need to report sponsor contribution towards this grant. We hope this will ease reporting requirements for your organization. However, you will want to maintain all of that documentation for sponsor contribution internally within your organization. All right, this concludes the reimbursement portion of managing a co-op grant. Congratulations again for becoming a grant partner, and we can't wait to hear about your accomplishments within your community. If you have any questions on any of the topics covered, either for reimbursements or for the programmatic side, please don't hesitate to contact me as my information is listed here. Good luck, and life really is better outside.